In the summer of 2022, a survey was done with the world's leading machine learning experts, asking them what they predicted the effects of AI would be on humanity as a whole. Now, while many thought that there was a greater chance it would be good than bad, 48% responded that there was a 10% chance or likely that the effects would be extremely bad, kind of in the ballpark of human extinction. As AI has taken off since the public release of ChatGPT back in November 2022, everyone is trying to ask, what are we supposed to do with this thing called AI? It represents a quantum leap forward in technology, and we're all trying to make sense of it. And now, the Vatican has weighed in on AI ethics. Or they've kind of weighed in on AI ethics. In today's video, we're going to be looking at iTech's new paper out on ethical AI, and they give a roadmap for it. And if you're not familiar with iTech, well, you can be forgiven because it started like yesterday. It was announced, right? And iTech is the Institute for Technology, Ethics, and Culture, and is a collaboration between the Vatican's Center for Culture and Education, as well as Santa Clara University's Markkula Center for Applied Ethics. Together, they've worked on a paper to give a roadmap on how we are to think about ethical AI. And in this video, we'll go through some of the main principles, as well as giving some of my takeaways from it. Spoiler alert, they're not all positive. The document, titled Ethics in the Age of Disruptive Technologies, an Operational Roadmap, lays out 7 key principles for companies trying to think through how to responsibly and ethically use artificial intelligence-based technologies. The following principles are respect for human dignity and rights, promote human well-being, invest in humanity, promote justice, access, diversity, equity, and inclusion, recognize that Earth is for all life, maintain accountability, and finally promote transparency and explainability. Now, the first thing that might hit you is the list on its face. It doesn't seem all that Catholic. And you could be entirely forgiven for thinking that, because in what follows as 140 pages, you'd be hard-pressed to find anything that felt overtly Catholic, besides the fact that Paul Teague, Monsignor, kind of jokes of why would the Vatican be involved in this in a little one-page introduction, talking about how the Vatican is interested in ongoing technology developments and has something to say about it. But what you find is that it more or less reads like any other ethical AI paper that you might read. Now, you might not read any of those. I happen in my day job to work in technology, public relations, and content marketing, which translation basically means I'm a ghostwriter for tech executives, and we're writing about this stuff all the time. And if you hadn't told me this came from the Vatican, I wouldn't have had any suspicions of that. But before we dive into all of the good and the bad with it, I do want to say one thing that I think is really good about this. One, I think the church needs to be involved in these conversations. Recently, I made a video about using ChatGPT to learn church history and talked about some of the perhaps positive ways that you can engage in artificial intelligence, specifically with these large language models like ChatGPT, to learn something and to refine your thinking and to kind of fast-track research processes. All interesting use cases. But as these conversations percolate around what are the foundational ethical questions about this technology, the church should be at the forefront. Why? You might say the church isn't like a technology company. Why should they be at the forefront of this? Because the church is uniquely positioned with 2,000 years of rich ethical teaching and theological reflection to help guide the world through these tricky modern questions. For so many people, they are grasping at straws as to how are we supposed to think ethically in a society where none of us are really taught ethics and we're just feeling our way through it. The church can bring clarity and time-honored wisdom. And at its best, that's what this document could do. And in its conversations around human dignity, I think that's great. But what's unfortunate about this document is that it fails to actually teach as the church. Now, I get it. In what they're trying to do is they're trying to work within the pervasive models of today. And if the church came out and only was like quoting Bible verses in Aquinas to talk about this, perhaps they'd limit the scope of its effectiveness. However, it also might overestimate people's interest in the church's voice when the church speaks exactly as the rest of the world. It's the same problem that we often see in seeker-sensitive attractional churches, right? By having nothing different to say than the rest of the world, your message gets subsumed into the rest of the world's message because you've lost your voice. It's my fear that that's what's going on a bit here. I will point out a couple other things, though, that I do like in the document, besides the fact that it exists and that the church is engaging in these conversations, which it should. One of the most interesting parts of the document is the principle number 7 of promoting transparency and explainability. This is going to get a bit technical, but bear with me for just 1 second. Within AI and technology broadly and deep learning techniques, there's this thing called the black box problem. What that means is that while you know the inputs into the model and you can see the outputs of the model, the inner workings of the model are a bit of a black box, not just to lay people like us, but even to the designers of these neural networks, because the computing that is going on isn't something that they can actually explain. They can help build it, but they can't actually explain everything that's going on. This is a problem because if you notice that there's something going wrong in your outputs, you're going to struggle to figure out why if it's not directly related to the inputs. It's also a problem, though, for learning to trust these models. Because if you don't know how it's working, it's difficult to trust what is coming out of it. Just like if I told you, hey, do not eat that, and you said, but it looks like anything else, you would want to know why and how is this going to be bad for me to eat this. It's actually a good thing, right, that your toddlers are always asking you why and how does this work? Why? How does this work? Because it promotes learning. So I think it's a really interesting point that they put within this document, a real concern for getting at transparency and explainability of these systems. If we want them to scale, if they're going to become part of our daily lives, I'm glad that that is in there. However, here are some of my concerns, as I've already mentioned. One, I don't feel that this is actually teaching as the church. Now, Paul Teague, who is writing from the Vatican's Center for Culture and Education, in his introduction, he writes the following, that this is a conversation that must include those of diverse nationalities, of various cultures, and of different faiths and none, so that we can learn together how to build a better world for all. And that's true. We live in a pluralistic society that is incredibly diverse, and to govern effectively within these societies, it is going to take a multitude of voices and perspectives to carry that out in any way that's actually going to work. Here's the problem. I feel like in this document, that the Vatican and the drafters of the document kind of hid from their own identity. They're calling for multiple perspectives, which is great, but show up to the table with your own genuinely Catholic perspective. It actually adds more richness than trying to strip that from your perspective in the name of trying to get greater acceptance. The second thing that's a bit concerning to me in this is that they're just taking as a fact of life what they describe as the primacy of stakeholder value. Now, this is a model in which the most fundamental aspect of a business, its primary responsibility, is to provide value to its stakeholders, which is kind of at the center of a capitalistic system with publicly traded companies. But I think the church could actually do something far more interesting by tapping into the riches of Catholic social teaching to question whether this should be placed as the primary concern, especially when we're talking about technology that has the potential to fundamentally change the human race. Maybe, just maybe, there could be things bigger than putting money in the pockets of shareholders. But for the purpose of this document, they're saying that they're forced to work within this framework. I think it would have been more interesting and perhaps been a deeper engagement in the ongoing conversation to begin to question that and say, does that have to be the case? And when we're looking at something that 48% of leading experts said it has a 10% chance or greater of causing, human extinction, we could say, let's put a pause on our prevailing assumptions and question them. And I think something worth exploring that they failed to explore in this document is the question of whether we just want to opt out entirely. I believe it's true that when we invent new technologies, we unlock new classes of responsibility. That comes from the Center for Humane Technology, right? And if we look at the way this has happened in the past, our engagement with social media, we introduce new technologies which unlock new responsibilities. but we failed to kind of live up to those, and social media ended up mastering us rather than us mastering it. AI, by proportion, is much more powerful. And just like in social media, I think there's not enough conversations of, oh, how can we always talk about how can we use it well, but sometimes I think we should be asking, should we be using it at all? We should be asking the same question, or at least it should be on the table for AI. Do we need to opt out entirely? I'm not saying you should, but I think it's a question worth asking, which they don't ask in this document. But I am glad to see the church is involved in these conversations. It should stay at the forefront, present its views as the church to bring a unique perspective to the table to tap into its riches of ethical and with wise teachings through deep theology over the centuries. Anyway, these are my thoughts, and I hope that you enjoy them as well. I'd love to know your thoughts. What are your thoughts on AI? Should Christians be using it? What are some interesting ways Christians could be using it? And how can we think ethically about this in the midst of our modern world? Well, a bit of a different episode today, but I hope you enjoy it. Until next time, be on the lookout for more videos. But as always, go out and love God and love others, because truly above all else, that will change the world.